Hello and welcome to this new video in which we will explain how to interact with objects. That is to say, move, rotate, or change the size of an object. In Blender, we call these three operations transforms or transformations. In this first part, we will talk about moving an object, and we will learn rotation and scale afterwards. Otherwise, this video might be way too long. So moving an object is obviously a super simple and common operation, but there are several ways to do it. The important thing is to choose the most suitable and efficient way. Therefore, we will see what Blender allows us to do. Let's start by selecting an object to move. Let's take our Gauss flare. Then we will select the Move tool in this panel. Small clarification. It may happen that this panel is not displayed if you accidentally press the T key, because T key is the shortcut to hide or display this panel. So if this is the case for you, use the T key or catch the panel here with the little arrows. Okay, so now let's select the Move tool, and there, this red, green, and blue thing has just appeared. We call this little thing a gizmo, and if we click on one of the colored arrows, we move the object in the direction of the arrow. So you easily understand that this gizmo is a tool that allows us to move an object in a specific direction along one of these three axes. The red one is called X, the green is called Y, and the blue is called Z. So let's say we want to move the weapon in the warrior's hand. We can first move it with the Y direction, then with the X direction. We adjust with the Z direction, and there we go, we did what we wanted to do. But we're going to start over a little faster. So cancel the last four moves with Ctrl and Z key. And there we're going to use one of these little squares. These squares represents the plane formed by two axes. This one is the plane between X and Y axis, so we can move the weapon along X and Y direction at the same time. So we redo what we have already done, but we save a little time. You've probably understood it, but for those who don't have too many memories of their college math class, these three directions, these three axes works a bit like a GPS or a compass. We can say that X is west or east direction, Y is north or south, and Z is altitude. In fact, when we move an object, it's like, a treasure map. We tell Blender, move our object 10 steps north and 10 steps east, and so on. And it is with this system that the software knows the position of all of our objects. In this panel in the Item tab, just before, let me tell you that like the left panel, this panel can disappear if you accidentally press the N key, so you can make it reappear either with the N key or by grabbing it like that. So we have a panel called Transforms, and here we can see the X, Y, and Z location values of selected object. These coordinates are absolute, that is to say, relative to the center of the world, which is represented here, under the base where the three axes are crossing each other. By default, Z-axis is hidden to not obstruct the view, but it can be displayed in the Overlay menu. So here, it's mean that my object is positioned at -18,848 millimeters from the center of the world in the direction of X-axis. And if I manually edit these values, let's set everything to 0, my object ends up at the center of the world. This is how we technically move a 3D object, even using a gizmo or other tool. All we are doing is giving Blender the new XYZ position values of an object. You can even fine-tune an object's position by manipulating the values directly. But overall, It would be super laborious to position an object by entering the values with keyboard. So gizmos were invented to set these values with a mouse. Note that, on the other hand, our mouse is a two-dimensional device. We can move it horizontally, vertically, or both at the same time, but if we move our mouse up and down relative to our table, well, nothing happened. And so, except few exceptions, we can't move an object in 3 dimensions directly. We can do it with 1 dimension, along a line, or with 2 dimensions, along a plane, but not with 3 dimensions. This has its advantage. For example here, if I want to adjust the position of this element keeping it in the barrel's axis, well, in this case, we only need one axis, the x1. Because what we absolutely don't want is moving the object along others' axis, as this would cause the object to come off the axis of the barrel. Another example with the base. If I want to refine its position to well center the miniature on it, but without changing the height, we then only use x and y axis 2D plane, and thus we preserve the value of z. But in other cases, when we pose or model a character, we would really like to be able to move along 3 axes in a single click, but unfortunately it is impossible with conventional mouse. On the other hand, we can avoid using the absolute orientation of the XYZ axis. We will see that in this last part of the tutorial. For some it will start to become a little bit abstract, but hey, don't worry if you don't understand everything. Sometimes it's good to do without understanding, and you can understand by doing. If instead of using one of the 3 XYZ axes with our gizmo, we use the small white circle, we also move the object. But it behaves a little bit strangely. In the current situation, the problem is that we can't see any axis. We don't know if we're giving any reference to Blender to help it make the move. If we try to place the Gauss flare on the base, we may have the illusion that it's done, but in fact, not really. We feel we don't control much. Well, actually, the XYZ axes we're using here are just oriented differently. We no longer move the object along absolutely oriented axes, such as west or east as we have done so far, and that's why it's confusing. So what we're doing is moving the object relatively to the view. So we can move an object at the top of the view, at the bottom of the view, or to the left or to the right of the view. But never in depth. Remember that a move in 3D is contradictorily made with 2 dimensions maximum. So when we use the small white circle, we say we are using axis of the view orientation. Let's imagine that this guy is you. It's you when you work on Blender. And this field is the view, what you currently see on your screen. And so, when we move an object with the axis of the view, all movement are parallels to view. So if the view is not aligned on any absolute axis, we can no longer refer to east, west, north, or south, but we are moving things to your left or your right, relatively to how your view is oriented. Here we have a small menu called Transform Orientation. And therefore in this menu, we can change axis orientation, that is to say, Gizmo's arrows orientation. So here we are in global orientation, in other words the absolute orientation we have used so far, where axes are aligned on cardinal points. Until now I have used the term absolute because it is the appropriate term from a mathematical point of view, but from now on, we will rather use the term global orientation in order to use Blender's lexicon. So we will change axis orientation, pay close attention to the gizmo here, and let's change orientation. And presto, we notice that the arrows of the gizmo have changed direction. Now X and Y no longer represent east, west, north, or south. They represent the left, the right, the top, and the bottom of the view. And the XY plane is always perfectly parallel to our point of view. Just like I showed you just before with the guy representing you. Z-axis is just not visible because it is perfectly perpendicular to the view. And if we move the object with this orientation, look at the values in the transform panel. The three values are changing at the same time. So you see, we can finally move an object with 3 dimensions. Well, in fact, it makes sense. Values of the 3 axes in this panel are values relative to axes' global orientation. And if we use another type of orientation, Blender takes care of converting our 2D displacement relative to the view into a 3D displacement relative to the global orientation. We change the orientation of the axes in this menu to show you, but when we use the white circle, Blender automatically uses the orientation relative to the view, so we can go back to the global orientation here. It won't change nothing for us. The shortcut to move an object this way is the G key. So I press G key and instantly, I do a 2-dimensional movement no matter where my cursor was in the view. I find it much more efficient than having to look for the gizmo with the mouse. We will use this method to place the Gauss flare back into the warrior's hand. So here we go, we press the G key, and we try to place the object as best we can. So yes, with this point of view, it is not very obvious. But what we can do is just change the view first. It's like in real life, sometimes to do a thing or a movement, we are in a wrong position and therefore we do it wrong. We then change position and it's much simpler. So first of all, let's set a view almost from above, so more or less parallel to the global XY plane, then we type G, and presto! We can place our object using the view plane. Then, to adjust the position and height, let's change the view again, and type G to move our object, and so on. And you will see, the more closer to the object we are, the more we can refine the position finely, because we can use almost the entire surface of the view to move the object over a very small distance. In addition, by changing view at each operations, we can check if our movement is correct with different points of view. It's really super convenient. Personally, I have become completely addicted to this way of moving an object. You can't do it with other software like 3ds Max of instance. And when I have to rework with 3ds, I'm feeling I miss an arm. Obviously, this technique is only valid when you need to move an object in a very free way, or let's say an artistic way like modeling or posing a character. But you'll see, this technique using the G key is really nice because, once you press G key, object is moving of course, but if you realize that it would be better to use an axis to move that object, well, you just have to press the X key. And now, we use the global orientation of X axis to move the object, just like if you were using a gizmo. And it's obviously working with Y axis by pressing Y key, and Z axis by pressing guess what? Z key? Blender shortcuts are really well designed. We can do the same thing with the middle mouse button instead of the X, Y, Z keys. If we maintain the button after having pressed G, movement will snap to one of the 3 axes. To validate the movement, press the left mouse button. Now you know all basics for moving objects. There is several other ways to go faster or to be more precise, but we will see that in with specific use case in future video. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and see you soon.